No, really, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here either. I think there's been some terrible mix-up, and I thought it was the comedy festival. So there we go. Now, don't panic, but I'm going to get a little bit serious on your ass, because I'm actually going to tell you a story about, well, it's about love that was told to me by a very important member of our family. It's basically the story of a couple that they were brought together because they both had this incredible love of music and singing, despite the fact that there was this incredible animosity between their two families. And their love endured everything from her throat cancer and alcoholism to him briefly falling in love with the long-lost twin of his first love, Carolyn. Not even the meddling of his ex-sister-in-law, which resulted in everyone presuming that his true love had been killed in a car accident, could keep them apart. Because she was not dead. She was singing in a cafe in a small town in Italy, and he found her all over again. Unfortunately, on the verge of them marrying for possibly the fourth time, he had a one-night stand with her best friend. Because he thought they'd broken up, the best friend became pregnant. She tragically had to have an emergency hysterectomy. The following week, she agreed to sing at the opening of a new nightclub where a chandelier fell on top of her. She was plunged into a coma for several days before they took her off life support. A few weeks later, her best friend gave birth to a beautiful baby girl who was named in her honor. I am, of course, speaking of Macy Sharp and Thorne Forrester from The Bold and the Beautiful. And the very important member of our family was the television set. We were not a family of storytellers. Mum and Dad may have been Irish, but they didn't exactly sit around sipping on whiskey while regaling my brother and I with heartfelt tales from the homeland. That could have been a Swedish accent. In fact, I think possibly the most lyrical thing my father ever said was, "I'm trying to watch the football, can you get your mother to shut the fuck up?" And not without reason, because Mum had kissed the Blarney Stone 3 times and certainly did have the gift of the gab. Unfortunately, her stories rarely had a point, or indeed an audience. Although once she did write me a very long letter where she told me the story in great detail of the day of my birth, including a graphic description of the actual delivery. This might have been touching, if not a little disturbing, if I hadn't found out 3 years later that I was adopted. That's when I realised that Mum was not only a pathological liar, but a little bit crazy. Dad didn't tell me any stories, but hey, he wore a lot of makeup and he gave me a lot of really great advice, such as when in my early 20s I told him casually over a lunch that, I don't know, I'd just been a bit depressed lately. Dad turned to me, didn't skip a beat, and said, "Do you think you'd be happier if you had a breast reduction? Because let's face it, you're completely out of proportion." So I guess my point is that while Mum and Dad might not have told me any stories, they gave me many, many stories. Thank you. And they unexpectedly gave me some stories as well, because I have been banging on about them, and let's face it, myself, for many, many years now. I've been lucky enough that strangers have sometimes felt that they could share their stories with me. So I actually just wanted to tell you a couple of those very briefly. One was from when I was on the radio, and a woman rang up to tell a story about how she and her husband had a barbecue. Bit of a big night. She's gone to bed and has left her husband talking to her boss. Apparently they were old friends. She's woken up at about 3 or 4 in the morning and she thought, oh, it's a bit weird, my partner hasn't come to bed. She's gone downstairs to find her husband, how to put this, orally pleasuring her boss. Now, what I love about this story is her reaction. She stood there, she looked at one, she looked at the other, and then she simply said, "Are you right?" It doesn't get much more Aussie than that, does it? And finally, a lovely woman called Elizabeth wrote me a letter, and in the letter she included a story about, as she put it, the beginning of the second part of her life. Because essentially her husband left her when she was in her 40s. Obviously she was devastated. Her buddy Nancy has flown from Perth to Melbourne, picked her up and taken her on a big holiday to Tasmania. They're travelling around in a bus, and you know, Nancy gives her the big lecture. She says, well, you know, you can choose to be miserable about this for the rest of your life, or you can choose to be happy. Then the two of them had a little look around, and I think I'll hand over to Nancy at this point. My God, look at the women on this bus. There were about 30 women aged between 60 and death who looked the most miserable, unsmiling people you could ever see. She said, when we're 80, I want us to be sitting on a bus and laughing our heads off at all the mad, wild adventures we've had between now and then. It'll be no use if we're sitting with bitterness and regrets, thinking of the things we might have done, would have done, or should have done, because by then it will be too late. Let's decide to die with no regrets. Well, Elizabeth is now in her 70s, and according to her letter, she did go on to have fantastic adventures, crazy sex. She did all this travelling with her son, and currently, in her words, she's being pursued by a panting 82-year-old. So she seems very happy, and she goes on. So that basically was the beginning of it. And every time we did anything mad, we'd say, that's one for the bus. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Mum and Dad, for giving me many, many, many ones for the bus.